All right, good morning. I am so glad that you are here worshiping with us today. Don't worry, Pastor Matt does preach here still. It has been a few weeks. He will be back next week. I hope I don't disappoint you, but come back next week if you really want to hear him. For now, you settle with me. But let me ask you guys a question. Have you ever thought about how much access to information and knowledge we truly have? Right? Like just at our fingertips, how much information we can gather. Like at a moment's notice, we can look what it looks like from the top of the highest mountain, and then at the same second, go and look and see how to cook a dish from Spain, right? Like we have so much access to information that we've had to actually create a phrase for it. We've created a colloquialism in our culture, and it's called Google it, right? Tell me you haven't said that at one point or ever heard that, right? Like, how do you solve this equation? Google, help me out, right? Like, or for some of you who are Apple, which is a subset, right? Like you say, Siri, can you help me out, right? But there's this reality that we have access to information that is just, it's vast amounts of knowledge. And if you think about it, like, archaeologists at some point in the future, they're going to find traces of our civilization, right? 1,000 years from now, they're going to be like, what is all this plastic? And then they're going to look at all the plastic and see, Google it. They're going to be like, what, were they talking to a god? Was this a deity? Is this something that like some special thing that they summoned up to try and figure out information and stuff? But there's a reality that we have to access of information. And if you think about it, how much access to information has changed just in your lifetime? I mean, just in my lifetime, the information that I used to have to gather was from the Encyclopedia Britannica. And you hoped that mom and dad paid for the full edition, which mine didn't, right? So like, if you had to do a study on Q, you were just up the creek. And you're just like, Mom, what? Like, you didn't want to fish out the $59.99 to get the full edition? She's like, no. Right? We got that at a garage sale. Like, that's the 92 edition. We're in 95 right now, right? And so you have to figure out, well, okay, how do I get this information? And so you go to the library, and then they give you the Where's Waldo card index that you got to look through. And you search and search, you find it. Then it gives you a code to then go Where's Waldo, search where the book is. Then you find the book. Then you got to open it up. You got to search and search inside the book to figure out what I got to define this and write this and do this. And it was so much more effort. So much more work to try and figure out that information. And it reminds me of a story of Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, he's having a conversation with a colleague of his. And the colleague and him are having a great conversation, and they're really getting into some mathematics and things like that. And so the colleague goes, hey, can you give me your phone number, and we can continue this conversation at a later date? And Albert Einstein's like, yeah, sure. And then just turns around and takes off. And his colleagues are a little confused, but he kind of starts to follow him. And so they go through all the way through the campus, and he winds up at the mathematics and science building, and he goes into his office, and it's just distraught everywhere, and there's papers everywhere. And he's pushing things around, he's searching around, and finally he finds the directory for the college. And he pulls it out, and he sets it down, and he opens it up, and he starts searching for his phone number. And his colleague is like confused, and he's kind of chuckling a little bit, and he's like, wait. You're one of the smartest men on earth, and you don't even know your phone number? And Einstein looks at him, and he literally says, why should I memorize something that I could so easily get from a book? Why should I memorize something when I know where to find the information for it? When I can have access to that information? And when you think about it, that's kind of how our culture is, right? Like, we don't actually learn the information, we learn how to Google it. We learn kind of where to look to find the information, but we actually don't build upon that information. We don't take that information in. And I think that there's a tendency that we don't realize, but we're actually missing out on some great knowledge by just trying to learn it for the moment, but not actually truly taking it in, right? There's wisdom and knowledge that we're not capitalizing on. And if you look at the ancient people, you can actually see that they utilized that reality, that they didn't have everything written down, but they utilized the wisdom that they would get time after time after time. And so if you watch documentaries, you read some of these articles about Egypt or Mesopotamia or the Mayan culture, anybody who's like megalithic rocks, right? Anybody who's moving these megalithic structures, the sad reality is our archaeologists and scientists are coming to the conclusion that it must be aliens. That's the only way they could have moved rocks, right? Because they didn't have the big cranes and the forklifts and the things that we have, so it must have been aliens. It's the only way, because if we haven't figured out and we have all this knowledge, then there's no way that they could have. And then you have some who are like, well, no, maybe it's not that they're aliens, but maybe they had technology that we don't have. Maybe it's a lost technology. In fact, a leading scientist or leading archaeologist in Egypt is saying that the Egyptians had lasers, which is how they carved the stones with the hieroglyphs and everything. And that's really confusing when you think about it, because even today, we're still confused as to the aspect of what lasers are and fully comprehend how lasers work, right? Like we've got it. We've got a general knowledge of it, but we don't know this advanced stuff that they think that they have. And so there's this mystery that they think exists that we're missing out on this. And I don't think that that's a lost tech. I don't think that they've lost tech. I think that we have lost generational knowledge, right? Think about this. If you're carving and your sole job in ancient times was to be a carver of stones, you learn that trade. You don't go on vacation. You don't set aside a 401k. You're not setting yourself up for retirement. You work until your fingers are gone or God takes you home, right? Like that's the only thing that you focus on. And so you hone your skill and you do this skill so well. And your son or daughter is going to take up that skill. And their son is going to take up that skill. And their son is going to take up that skill. And next thing you know, you have generation after generation after generation of wisdom and knowledge and a skill set that is capitalized on. They're moving forward and forward and forward. And so you see this knowledge of growth being capitalized on. And that's something that I think that we're missing out on. In fact, you can kind of prove it to yourself if you've ever tried to build a deck and you wanted to hire a carpenter. Okay, I'm going to give you a little tidbit here. The best carpenters are ones whose dad or grandfather was a carpenter as well. You could hire one man who's been a carpenter for 20 years, and his dad was a carpenter, and his dad was a carpenter, and he could work circles around 5 or 6 employees at one time. Because he knows what to do. He knows the tips. He knows the tricks. He knows the trade. He knows it so well that he can go and make 10 cuts and go set it up. Meanwhile, everybody's out there stretching where you're measuring 1 cut at a time. You're going back to the saw. And so he could probably do a deck in 2 days, whereas a group of 5 could probably do it in 5 days. And there's a reality of the knowledge and the wisdom that they build on. And they grow from, and they understand this because they access that knowledge and they go further and further and further and further. But if you're like me, we don't always have the knowledge that we think we do, right? Have you ever gone to IKEA? You ever tried to put something together from IKEA, right? If you're a manly man, you get put down a lot. But if you're a manly man, you throw that instruction manual off to the side and you're like, babe, I got this. And you start putting it together and you're building this thing up and you're making whatever it is, some dresser that has special things on it. And you put it all together and you're like, hey, babe, come look. And my wife comes and looks and she's like, what's that extra piece of wood there? Why is there 5 extra screws? Why are there 2 wood dowels? Like what why? And in my mind, I'm going, IKEA's just generous, right? They gave me extras just in case I broke it. Come on, babe, like, right? Like this is the assumed knowledge that I have, is that I've got it all down. I've got it under control because all I have to do to solve everything is just Google it. I can just look it up when I need to. And I think there's a danger in that mentality because it begins to bleed into our faith. That all we have to do is just learn what we need to know at the moment. When crisis comes, when pain comes, when a struggle is there, learn what I need to learn at a moment's notice about who God is, and then everything's fine. It's kind of like we take the mentality of sprinkling Jesus on every Sunday, but then Monday through Saturday, he doesn't really exist. It's just, I need to know it when I need to know it, and that's it. And we have this mentality of God fixing us. That's the whole purpose that we're here, is for God to fix us. And we lose sight of the reality that we're not in this church and in this moment here to be fixed. We're here to be in a relationship with God, to truly embrace this relationship that we have with God, that our God loves us, adores us, desires to be with us. But we're so consumed with this self-help mentality and this fix me mentality that we get distracted. If you go into any book website, you can look that up. The top 20, at least half of them are self-help. How to fix my life, how to fix my marriage, how to fix this, that, or the other. You know, Atomic Habits was #1 for many weeks, and I love that book. It's a great book, but if you don't put it into practice, it's worthless. It's just words on a page, right? So there's still effort that has to be involved, and so we get so caught up in this fix us now, God mentality that we lose what it is to understand who God is. We lose the knowledge of God. We lose the wisdom of God because we're so distracted by the wisdom that the world offers us that we don't focus on what God shows us. We don't focus on what God has already done in our lives and how we can be impacted by that truth and that reality in no matter what situation that we're in. And so even though we've gone through this, and even though the ancients had this is the same struggle that we've seen throughout the entirety of history, is that we are chasing after happiness. We're chasing after perfection. We're chasing after popularity. We're chasing after these things instead of relying on God. We rely on the wisdom of the world instead of what God shows us and the knowledge and understanding that we have in God. And this is why Psalm 139 is so powerful, and we're going to go through that today. But Psalm 139 is so powerful because David, he takes this opportunity to showcase 3 amazing attributes of God. 3 attributes of God that are foundational, they're substantial, they're something that you can literally put your hope in, you can put your reliance on, that you can see this amazing reality of who God is. And in light of who God is, it begins to change our perspective of what's actually going on in our lives. It begins to change our understanding of what's going on in our lives, because the things that seem so huge that they're going to knock us down and tear us apart actually seem small in comparison to who our God is. And so to learn this knowledge and compound this knowledge and grow in this knowledge is paramount for our life. It's paramount for our faith. And so today, if you have a Bible, go ahead and open it today to Psalm 139, or on your phone, or if you need a Bible, we'll have it off to the side, or we will have it on the screen here. But let's go ahead and start at Psalm 139 and do verses 1 through 6. It says this: "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it." This power that that David is showcasing about God is substantial. And the first attribute, this attribute that David is revealing to us, is that God is all-knowing. God is all-knowing. Theologians try and complicate it, and they say omniscient, but God is all-knowing, okay? You can write omniscient down, but you'll be confused later. You know it, but anyways. But David, he takes this opportunity to showcase the reality of God's all-knowing nature. And he uses a poetic term, a poetic style, technique called merism. And merism is the use of opposite extremes to showcase the vast amount of knowledge built in. Right? Like for instance, another merism that's really easy for us to remember and understand is that Jesus takes our sin as far as the east is from the west. Right? There's no time where west becomes east. There's no contact between the two. West will always be west, east is always east. And so that's an extreme opposites that's being showcased there. And so that's called merism. And so David, he takes this opportunity to showcase these extremes. And here he says that, God, you know me when I sit and when I rise. When I am sitting down or when I'm standing up. Doesn't matter where I'm sitting down or where I'm standing up. Everything in between there, in the moments between sitting and standing, in the moments where I'm at the grocery store or sitting in the car, waiting in line, hating traffic and yelling at the stoplight, no matter where we are at, God knows what's going on. He knows where our heart is. He knows where our mind is. He knows all of this. David goes on, he says, you know my going out and my lying down. Whether I'm at home or anywhere else on the face of the earth, God, you know where I'm headed. You know where I'm going. I might not know where I'm going, and I end up at Walmart when I'm supposed to be at Target, but like, God knows where I'm going. You ever get that road hypnosis where you're just kind of driving along and you end up at a location, you're like, I don't know how I got here, but it's good that I got here, right? Like I didn't run anybody off the road, or you're looking at the police report seeing, but that's kind of the expanse that he's trying to say is no matter where we are going, God knows what we are doing, where we are going, why we're going there. And then he finishes that God knows us. He says, you hem me in behind and before. And this picture of hemming me in behind and before actually deals in Numbers with the tassels that God tells Israel to wear. He says to wear these 4 tassels on the 4 corners of your shirt. And so in doing that, no matter what direction you go, no matter forward, backwards, left, right, cat a corner, whatever, God is leading you because the tassel literally represents the law of God. That God is going with you. He is before you. He is behind you. And no matter what direction you're going in, God's love and God's law exist with you. And it's this knowledge that God has of us that we can't go anywhere that he doesn't know where we're going. We cannot catch God off guard. No matter what you do, no matter what is happening, no matter what happens to you, you can't catch God off guard. He knows everything, right? Jesus, he showcases this reality in such a perfect way. In Luke, the Gospel of Luke, Jesus, he's taking this opportunity to preach in this man's house. And so this paralyzed man and a couple of his buddies decide, hey, we're going to go interrupt Jesus' message. We're going to dig a hole in the roof of this guy's house. Then we're going to lower our buddy down so that maybe Jesus could heal this paralyzed man. Now, that's rude. Don't go digging through somebody's house, like through their roof of their house. But they knew that they had to do something drastic. And so they go and they start beating through the roof of the house, and Jesus, he's preaching and teaching, and there's Pharisees and Sadducees and all kinds of people just sitting there listening to what's being taught. And the roof's caving in because, they're dropping this guy in. And so they finally drop this guy in, and Jesus, he stops his message. He turns and he looks at the paralyzed man and he says, my son, your sins are forgiven. And immediately, this is the best part, immediately the Pharisees in the back of the room began to think to themselves, this is heresy. This is blasphemy. Only God can forgive sins. And Jesus stops talking to the paralyzed man, turns and looks at the Pharisees, and it says, I heard what you were thinking. And just to show you that not only do I have the power to raise him, or to heal him, or to forgive his sins, I'm also going to tell him to stand up. Because which is easier to do? Tell somebody that their sins are forgiven, or tell a paralyzed person to stand up and walk out? Well, it's easier to tell to tell him that his sins are forgiven. And he says, just to show you that I'm God and you are not, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk out the door. And the paralyzed man stood up, picked up his mat, and walked out the door. And it showcased this beautiful picture, this beautiful reality. Not only can God heal us, right? That's a whole different attribute to get into. But that God knows even our thoughts. God knows everything. God knows everything. And yes, that's kind of scary. I know my thoughts, right? I know my thoughts. And I'm like, sorry, Jesus, right? Like when I'm driving, oh man, I pray for redemption after that. But like, it's kind of scary when you think about that. That God knows our thoughts, he knows our hearts, he knows our desires, he knows our motivation. He knows that I'm friends with that guy so that I can get free ice cream, right? He knows that I put the police badge sticker on the back of my car so that cops won't pull me over, right? I support them, but I bad motivation sometimes, and it's still kind of that heart behind it. But when you really get into it and you really start thinking about it, it's actually kind of freeing to know that your God, my God, knows everything that we're thinking. He knows every desire in our heart. He knows every motivation behind every action that we have. He knows it all. And yet still desires a relationship with us. Think about that. He knows how messed up my thoughts are, and yet he still says, I love you. He knows your motivations behind what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing, your desires, your dreams, the heartaches, the hurts, everything, good, bad, and ugly. He knows it all, and he still says, I love you. That's freeing. That's freeing to know that I can come to God with anything and say, God, I confess this to you. And he's like, yeah, I know. I saw that. I know your heart. I know your mind. I know everything about you. I know it all, and I still desire that intimacy with you. David says at the very beginning, he says that you search me and you know me. That verbiage, that tone, that know me, that word and phrasing is actually an intimacy that is later used in marriage to showcase marriage. There's an intimacy there that God has with us, that there is nothing hidden from him about us. I know my wife, and my wife knows me. I know her better than anybody on this earth, and she knows me better than anybody on this earth. But there's still something that's missing between us, right? There are still things that I don't know about her and still things she doesn't know about me. But the intimacy that we have with God is nothing like that because he knows everything. Everything about us. And he still looks at us and he still says, I desire to be with you. I love you. I care about you. I want to be with you. This God of creation knows you and still wants a relationship. It's amazing. It's amazing when you think about that. And the knowledge of this is actually life-changing. It's life-changing because when we begin to look at the dynamic aspect of our relationship, the dynamic picture of our relationship with God, that no matter what happens, no matter what we do, no matter what we say, no matter what we think, God still is passionately pursuing us. It's freeing. It helps us realize that even though I feel that I'm horrible, I feel that I'm detestable, I feel that I struggle, I feel that I'm failing, God says, I don't even care. I desire to be with you. The value that we have behind God searching us and knowing us and pursuing us is amazing. And it changes every aspect of our lives when we begin to view the world through the lens that God has for us, the knowledge that he knows. David doesn't stop there. He continues in Psalm 139, verses 7 through 12. He says this. He says, where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend into the heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me. Your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. This second attribute that David begins to showcase is that God is everywhere. God is everywhere. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere. It's amazing to think about that. And this is incredibly powerful to Israel, especially when David was writing this, because in the ancient Near East, the people there, they believed that gods were bound by land and territory. They were bound by land and essentially where their temple was. And so if the god didn't own that land, he wasn't over that land, he didn't have power over that land, he didn't exist there. And so Israel, this was paramount for them because they needed to know when they were entering the promised land that they had to capitalize on it so that their God could show up, that their God could be in that land. And David, he corrects them and he doesn't even realize how powerful of a correction this will be, but he corrects them and says, look, God is everywhere. God is everywhere. He's not bound by land. He's not bound by location. He's not bound by a temple. He's everywhere we need him to be. And for Israel, later they'd be in captivity in Babylon and Assyria, and they would have to realize that their God still exists in a foreign land. Their God is still powerful, even under a foreign king. Their God is still powerful even over other gods. Their God still existed and was around them even when the lifestyle of the people and the culture of the people was completely different than them. That God was still with them. And the same goes for us. No matter what nation we're in, no matter what government we're under, no matter what state we're located in, no matter what's happening around us, no matter what chaos might seem too big for us to endure, God is still God over that. God is still present with us. He is still with us no matter what situation we're in. David says, if I go to the depths of Sheol, hell, if I go to the bottomless pit of hell, God, even there, you're there. You're still with me even if I was there. If I go to the bottom of the sea or the top of a mountain, if I go to outer space, to the moon, or no matter where I go, God, I cannot outrun you. I cannot get away from you. You are always there. And that reality is true even for us individually, that even in those valleys, even in that darkness, even in that time of depression and self-hatred and the hurt and the anxiety, God is still with us. Even in the midst of the addiction and the pain, God is still with us. Even in the midst of struggle and loss, God is still with us. No matter how dark that valley might seem, God is still with us. He doesn't leave us or forsake us. God is still there. At our worst and at our best, no matter what is going on in our lives, God's presence is still there. He is still with us. And he desires to be with us. He passionately desires to be with us. This knowledge and understanding, as we continue to build an understanding of who God is and the knowledge of who he is, changes everything for us. That if we truly begin to trust him at the worst, trust him in the valleys, trust him when everything seems hopeless, it begins to put everything into perspective that it is smaller and less powerful than our God. And David, he goes on to finish with this. Psalm 139, 13 through 18, he says this. He says, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret. Intricately woven in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would to count them, they would be more than the sand. I awake and I am still with you. This third and final attribute that David showcases is that God is all powerful. God is all powerful. He is omnipotent. He is all powerful. How amazing is that? And this is the epitome of the picture of God that we kind of tell ourselves, that we kind of grow up with, is that God is all powerful. And he showcases that throughout the rest of Scripture. He showcases how powerful he is, that this God, he created from this mud pie this man, and he formed him and fashioned him, and then he breathed into this mud pie breath of life, and it turned to Adam. That this God who desired to create something created everything out of nothing. This God is all powerful. This God who says he holds the cosmos in his hands. That it says that he knows each star. He's numbered each star and he knows each one by name. That God of creation is so powerful. In the Psalms, it says that he speaks, and when he speaks, it is so powerful that the cedars of Lebanon, these giant trees like the redwood forest, these trees explode and splinter because of the power within God's voice. He is so powerful and he is so amazing and he is so worthy of our praise that he creates a vacuum of worship. Not that he demands the worship, but that there is such a presence that worship has to come out. And if we didn't exist and we weren't worshiping him, it says that even the rocks would cry out in worship of God. That's how powerful our God is. That's who our God is. And that God knit you together, formed you in your mother's womb, and gave you life. That God who holds the galaxies in his hands cared enough to form each and every one of us and gave us the personality that we have and gave us the hair, or some of us the hair that we have, and gave some of us good muscles and others just chubbiness. That God formed you exactly how you were supposed to be. He gave you the skills, the gifts, the talents, the abilities. He gave you exactly everything that you were supposed to have. And this is the beauty of when he starts, he says that you were fearfully and wonderfully made. That term fearfully is not intimidation, it's not scared, it's intentionally. That God, with absolute intention, created you to be you, exactly you, with nothing else. God didn't make a mistake. He's not in that business. This God formed and fashioned you specifically to be you. You were fearfully and wonderfully made. Fearfully and wonderfully made. And the reality is when you begin to process that and you begin to understand that reality, you begin to realize that you are here for a reason. You're not only here on this earth for a reason, you're here in this building for a reason, you're here in this community for a reason. You exist for a purpose. And some of us might not know what that purpose is, but God still has that purpose for each and every one of us. You are here for a reason. This knowledge of God, of his absolute power and how he intricately formed us and shaped us, this God who is ever present with us, who is constantly with us, no matter where we go, no matter how far we think we can run from him, he is still there with us. This God who knows everything about us, the good, bad, and the ugly, still desires a relationship with us. That God, knowledge of that God, understanding of that God begins to change everything in our lives. It changes everything in our lives. And it influences how we view the world. It influences our life. It influences our hope. It influences our dreams. It influences when hardship comes our way. It influences when loss comes our way, because God is so much more powerful than anything this world throws at us. And it changes everything about us if we begin to let it. And it's so frustrating because we'll get on social media and we'll look and we'll see this one person who says this one thing, try this diet, and we'll try that diet and we'll change heaven and earth to try that diet, and we'll be so sold into trying that diet and we don't even know if it's real or not. We don't know if there's truth behind it or not. And yet we have a God of creation who has proven himself time and time and time again in our lives personally, and yet we still struggle to follow him. We still struggle to put our faith in him. But Susan on social media, she said, stop eating this, and I'm going to stop, right? We put our faith behind things that we don't even trust in, and yet the God of creation who has given us every ounce of opportunity to trust him, we still don't put our trust in him. We still struggle to trust him. And I want to finish with this. I was having a conversation with Erin the other day, our worship pastor, and she was in the office with me, and we were talking, and I began to tell her that I'm a realist. I'm a realist, not an optimist, not a pessimist. I'm a realist. I look at things real. And she began to laugh at me and make fun of me because she said, no, you're an optimist. And then she proceeded to prove that I was an optimist. But I'm hard-headed enough to go, no, you're wrong. But I gave up a little bit. And I said, okay, maybe I'm not a realist. Or maybe I'm not an optimist. Maybe I'm just an optimistic realist, right? Never give in, right? Maybe I'm just an optimistic realist. But I'm a realist because I've been through a lot of hard things in my life. I've been through loss. I've been through struggles. I've been through depression. I've been through broken dreams and broken promises. I've had family who have let me down. I've had friends who have let me down. I've been through all kinds of abuses. I've struggled heavily with addiction of certain things. I've been to that place where financially I didn't know where the next bill was going to get paid from. I've been to that place where you are hopeless and it seemed like you had every kind of red notice before you and you just didn't know what to do and where to put the money and you just struggled and you said, okay, well, I'm going to put it here because at least we'll have food. We might not have electricity, but we'll at least have that. I was homeless for a while when I was in college. I've gone through a lot. I've had moments where my wife didn't want to be with me, where she thought divorce was the best option. I've been that horrible of a person that the greatest person on earth didn't want to be with me anymore. I've been through hurt and heartache. I've been to a point where I've hated my life so much that I wanted to take it away. And that happened multiple times. And there's so many times where I begin to look at my past and I look at my life and I say, this is why I'm a realist. It's because I've experienced a lot. I've gone through a lot. I've felt a lot of pain. I've felt a lot of things that maybe some haven't and some have. But I've been through a lot. But then I begin to realize that I'm an optimist because of how big my God is. I'm an optimist because how can I not be? This all-powerful God, this all-knowing God, this ever-present God loves me. He is making the hugest mistake in my mind, but he loves me. That's irresponsible of him, right? But he loves you. This God of creation who holds the cosmos, who spoke things into being, who fashioned and formed you intricately to be you, loves you, desires you, adores you, passionately pursues you. How can we not be optimistic? How can we not be joyful? How can we not be happy? How can we not just be oozing, glowing awesomeness because of who he is? And so let me ask you, how big is your God? How big is your God? And do you even trust him? Do you trust him? I want to challenge you with two things before we go. The first I want to challenge you is find joy and confidence in who God is. You have an amazing God who wants and desires a relationship with you. You don't have to do anything extra. You don't have to fix your life. You don't even have to change your thoughts. Just show up. Begin to trust him. Put your faith in him. Watch what changes when you begin to do that. Find joy and confidence in who he is, because he is more powerful than all the hardship and the heartache that the world is going to throw at us. He's more powerful than anything that you could ever comprehend. He is more powerful, and the reality is he has brought you through it before. When you begin to look back, you begin to think how life has progressed, you see that God has brought you through the struggle before, and through the hardship and the pain and the loss and the hurt. God's brought you through it before. And that leads me to my second encouragement, my second challenge. Find a way to remind yourself of what God has done. In the ancient times, they would put up this thing called a stele. There's a big megalithic rock, and they'd put this stone up, and they would carve into the stone the story of what God was doing, what God did at that point. They did this when they began to enter into the promised land. They set up this stele, and they carved into it, God has given us the promised land. And it was put there so that when everybody started to turn around because it didn't seem like it was going to work out, when it seemed like that army was too big or that struggle was too much, they began to turn around, run away, and they came across that stele, and they would turn and see and be reminded of what God has already done in their lives. And they would say, okay, if my God was that big, he's still big enough to take me further. Find something to put into your life to remind you of what God has done. For some, it's beads. For some, it's a rock. For some, it's a keychain. Some it's a tattoo, whatever it is. Find something that reminds you of what God has done so that when that hardship comes, when that heartache comes, when that thing that seems too big shows up in your life, you begin to put it into perspective and see that God is more powerful than it. That God is bigger than whatever struggle you have, or whatever heartache that you're going to endure, whatever pain that you're going through. Why? Because he's brought you through it before, and he can bring you through it again. And so I challenge you to those two things. Find joy and confidence in who he is, and put reminders in your life of what he has already done. And see how that begins to shape and to change your perspective on this world. Father God, I thank you so much for the chance to worship you today. God, you are a powerful God. You are mighty beyond our understanding. God, I thank you that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. That we are made intentionally on purpose to be exactly who we are. God, help us to focus on you. Help us to find joy in you. Help us to find confidence in you. You're an amazing God. So worthy of our praise. Let us worship you right here, right now. God, we love you, we thank you, we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.